Hello and welcome. Today it's kind of a little gray here in Greenwich, Connecticut. I am lucky enough to have Sean Scanlon, RCT State Controller. Hey, Sean, how are you today?
Hi, Trevor. Good to see you.
Welcome to the show. Okay, a little bit about Sean. He is the son of a police officer and small business owner. He attended Guilford Public Schools. He went to Boston College, which, by the way, I grew up right next door there, and returned to Connecticut with the goal of helping others. He began working with Senator Chris Murphy, who right now is really killing it out there. We love Chris Murphy. And since 2014, Sean has been he's been serving our state at first as state representative for Connecticut's 98th district. And he has been controller since 2023. So actually, Sean, I'm going to have you first start with telling us, what does the state controller actually do? What's your job?
I get this question about 55 times per day, so I've got a good answer down. But essentially, Trevor, the way that I explain to people is I'm the chief financial officer of the state. I pay all the state's bills. We keep the state's books. We run all of the benefits for the state employees and the retirees, like their health insurance and their pension. And we also are the state's fiscal watchdog. So I am constantly looking out for ways that we can help the fiscal health of the state or to help the taxpayers save some money. But at the most basic level, most of your listeners would probably understand what a chief financial officer does, and that's what I do.
That's great. That's a very important job, obviously. So just up until now, let's just say right till this month, this year, how are we doing as a state fiscally? Are we being responsible? Are we paying our bills? Are we up to date? Do we have a lot of debt? How are you? What's our fiscal health, so to speak?
Well, 10 years ago, I was elected to office for the first time. And as you mentioned, I was a state representative for my hometown of Guilford. And when I took office 10 years ago, Connecticut was in the midst of a fiscal crisis. We had massive budget deficits. We had people and businesses fleeing the state. There were large tax increases, draconian spending cuts. We were in a really bad situation. And then in 2017, we did a really good thing, which was we passed a bipartisan budget that completely changed the way we budget as a state. And as a result of that, Trevor, if you fast forward to today, 7 years later, we've had 7 consecutive years of ending our fiscal year with a surplus. We have paid down over $10 billion of the pension debt that we had, and we have built up an over $4 billion rainy day fund, which is literally at its legal limit per our state constitution right now. And that's never happened in the history of Connecticut. So in the last 10 years, we've gotten our fiscal house in order. But as I tell people all the time, I hope the next 10 years are about actually growing our state, something that we have needed to do for a really long time. And I think that we're primed to do that. Though what's happening in Washington, I will say, is making that a bit challenging lately.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to dive into that for a second, but I think there's a couple of things that a lot of people don't quite understand about, say, paying 10 billion down of this pension debt, because it saves quite a lot in interest payments. That literally this is money now directly available to us for programs, for supporting teachers and education, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I go back to that crisis when I first got elected to the legislature, right? Like you, Trevor, I ran for office. I knocked on thousands of doors. I knocked on 6,000 doors in my first campaign. I know you know a thing or two about that. And I got to Hartford with all these ideas of what I wanted to do to help people. And I got a proverbial pat on the head as the youngest member of the legislature at the time. And they said, "Hey, kid, all those are great ideas, but we don't have any money. We can't do that." And that's because, as you just talked about, the amount of debt payments that we had to make every year were crowding out our budget. Now, ordinarily, about 75% of our budget is fixed costs that we can't get anything out of. So most people don't realize that, but in a $26 billion budget, 75% of it is kind of fixed on a few different things. But the problem was that debt service was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so that's because mostly we weren't paying down the debt. We started instituting pensions in 1939 in Connecticut, and it wasn't until 2011 that we actually made the annual required contribution each year for that pension. Think about that. It's crazy to think about. So as a result of the fact that we have been making that required contribution and some since 2017, just in this budget alone that the legislature and the governor are working on right now, there is $750 million more of spending that they can do that we otherwise would have had gone to a debt service. And so by paying down debt, it's not just freeing my kids' generation of this millstone that's
Mm-hmm.
been around our neck. It's actually helping us meet the needs of Connecticut right now, whether that's paying for a tax cut for folks, whether that's putting more money into the local public school systems or the local hospital infrastructure. All of that are things that we were not able to do in the last decade, and we are now because we are been fiscally disciplined.
It's really fantastic, and congratulations. I know this has been, again, a bipartisan effort. We have these
Yes.
fiscal guardrails, super important. But again, I just don't think a lot of people understand the impact of that. Now, there's one other very positive thing, and then we're going to jump into some negatives. But we did end up, and I believe I watched you on a news conference. We came up with an extra $350 million due to investing some ARPA funds very well. And talk to me a little bit about how we're going to spend that or how that came about. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so we had gotten a lot of money during COVID, about $3 billion. And there are some out there that say, hey, the only reason that everything Scanlon just talked about is because we got this federal money. That's not true.
Yeah.
We started this process of turning around the state in 2017. COVID
Hmm.
didn't hit until 2020. We had already saved a lot of money by then. We already had surpluses. Did the federal money help? Of course it did. But we weren't relying on that to turn this around. We had already begun to turn that around. But we did invest that money, and that's more of the treasurer thing than a comptroller thing,
Got
which
it.
sometimes confuses people. But
Hmm.
what the governor has decided to do with that money, Trevor, and something I fully support, is he said, hey, I'm going to take that $300 million of surplus money that we got from the investments and return on that money, and I'm going to create universal childcare in the state for
Oh, right.
everyone
Okay.
that makes less than $100,000. Now, I have a 2.5-year-old and a 5.5-year-old. My wife and I spend almost as much each month as we do on our mortgage to put our kids into
Hmm.
daycare, and
Yeah.
one of them doesn't even go full time. This is a crisis that affects every single family in Connecticut, no matter how much you earn or not. But what the governor is doing, I think, is incredibly helpful to, again, making the state more affordable. And if we can make the state more affordable, it's going to be a better state when it comes to economic growth because people will want to live here. They'll want to buy a house here. And if we can make childcare more accessible and affordable in Connecticut, I think we will have done a good thing. The legislature has other ideas of how they would use that money,
Mm,
and
okay.
they will be working to come up with an agreement on that in the next 3 weeks here before the session ends. But I'm confident that we're going to find a good use for that money. And again, I
Great.
think it speaks to the fact that we've made a lot of progress in our state that we should be proud of, but we still have a lot of work left to do.
Got it. And again, appreciate all of you can hear the alarm, the fire truck outside. Anyway, so I would love to see better childcare. Personally, I've got young people in my family who are going to start having their own families. So I think it'd be more affordable, and I'd love them to come back here to Connecticut. It's not affordable yet, though, for them. So now I want to talk about what's happening on the federal level, how this is going to impact us directly here in Connecticut, and then even boil it down to because we have gotten a thing where they're all here in Greenwich. So I'm not entirely sure because I didn't even see a whole lot of this about it on the news, but the Republican House has it's given us an idea of what they want to do with this budget. And it's really focused to make tax cuts for the wealthy, predicated on cutting Medicaid for 80 million Americans, some large amount of people. So how's that going to impact us here in Connecticut, Sean?
Well, it's going to impact us big time. And I have spent the last couple months traveling across the state and hosting forums and roundtables with different members of Congress. Jim Himes and I did one together in Bridgeport a few weeks ago to listen to doctors, to patients, to advocates, to hear what the proposed cuts might mean for them and their patients and their hospitals and their nursing homes. And unfortunately, Trevor, these cuts were just proposals in the last few weeks. Today, actually, they become real because Congress today is holding a hearing on a bill that will cut Medicaid by $700 billion over the course of the next 10 years. And people often confuse Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare is health insurance for people who are 65 plus in our state. Medicaid is health insurance for the most vulnerable people in our state. And there's 1 million people right now, Trevor, that are on Medicaid. These are low-income children. These are seniors in nursing homes. Medicaid is the largest provider and payer for nursing home care in our state. These are people with disabilities, right? This is the most vulnerable people in our state. And this $700 billion cut will have devastating consequences for the healthcare and, frankly, in some cases, the lives of these individuals. And I think we have seen some coverage that you've probably read, Trevor, where pundits and politicians are saying, hey, these cuts are less bad than we had anticipated. While that technically may be true, any of these cuts will be devastating for our state. And the only reason they're less bad is because citizens in this country and the state have been speaking up and standing up and saying, don't cut Medicaid for my grandmother in a nursing home. Don't cut Medicaid for my disabled child who has severe special needs and disabilities. And while some of that broke through and they did water down the bill, they only watered it down from 880 billion to 700 billion, right? So nobody should be claiming victory yet. We have a lot of work to do. And as the chief financial officer of the state, I have been out there and will continue to be out there raising the alarm bell and urging the people of Connecticut and frankly the country to speak up and call Congress, even if you think your representative agrees with you, to let them know how devastating these cuts would be for our communities, for our families, for our country.
Okay, so I just want to go over this. So anybody who's listening, I'm on the phone with our state controller, CT state controller, Sean Scanlon, and we're discussing something incredibly important. It's going to affect every single person in Connecticut. There's roughly 1 million, I believe it's 951,000 Connecticut residents who rely on Medicaid, and this is the most vulnerable population. Again, this is the disabled, children, low-income children, and seniors. Now, I was reading a little bit about the bill, and it looked like there's a work requirement now, and you're now going to have to register at least 2 times a year. And there was some other part of it that I might be forgetting. But how is a low-income child or a senior who's in a senior care home going to do these things 2 times and work? Like, I don't understand how this works.
Yeah, work requirements is a great example of something that when my friends on the other side of the aisle, they talk about this, most people say, hey, that sounds reasonable, that sounds rational. But the premise of instituting a work requirement is as if people are not working. 80% of the people who are on Medicaid right now in Connecticut are working or have some form of employment. And the 20% that are not, in almost every circumstance, it's because that person is a child or that person is severely disabled and cannot work, right? We're talking about the working poor here, Trevor, people who are working 2 or 3 jobs, some of which at big box stores that don't pay their employees enough to survive on, where they're working at Walmart or Target or a fast food restaurant and still don't make enough to get by. And they have to use the help of Medicaid in the state because they're not offered insurance anywhere else. So when I think about things like work requirements to the basic public, sometimes that sounds good until you realize that these people are some of the hardest working people right now and some of the people that literally cannot work. And so I think it's important for us to be speaking up about this, but it's also important for us to be trying to educate people about what this program actually is and who's actually on it. And that's unfortunately not really happening right now in Washington.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So, and I'm going to bring it super local, which is, I'm sure you're aware of Nathaniel Witherall, which is our senior care center here. I think we're the last town that actually owns a care center. So how will this impact Witherall with this cut potentially? What do you think?
Well, I am still analyzing this bill. The governor's office and my office are, this bill came out about 24, 36 hours ago. And so we're still coming through it and going to assign a dollar amount to every cut that's in the bill so that we really have that better understanding of it. But what I would just say is that whenever you do anything to cut this program that affects people, there are always downstream effects to that.
Mhm,
Hospitals will
mhm,
be very affected by this, nursing homes, senior centers, anybody who relies on funding to help this population is going to see some cut over this. And again, as you said at the top of this, Trevor, um, to level set this for people, this is not because we're in some sort of fiscal emergency and they have to make these cuts to balance the budget. They're doing this to pay for a gigantic tax cut to the wealthiest people in our country. And I'm not one of these people who demonizes people who earn a lot of money. That's capitalism, that's America. I
mhm,
understand that.
mhm,
But when we talk about getting rid of healthcare for children or healthcare for people who have disabilities, I think we really have to look in the mirror as a country and ask ourselves whether that's really the morals that we want to have when it comes to putting together our budget. And so I think the localized cuts will be known in a few days. But what I can tell you for certain right now is that these cuts will have an impact on you. And, it's not just about, what is the obvious, right? I'll give you another one, Trevor, on an issue I know is personally important to you and probably many of your listeners, which is women's health care, right? There is
yes.
a prohibition in this bill that says that any Medicaid provider that also performs abortions cannot get any Medicaid funding for any other women's health care that they're providing, whether that's cancer screenings, whether that's contraception, whether that's just wellness checkups for half the population of our state and half the Medicaid
Mm,
population. They now cannot get paid by Medicaid for any of those services that have nothing to do with abortion, just because those physicians also perform abortions, which is legal in this state, I may add. And so, any way you look at this is going to have a disastrous impact on people. And again, without sounding like a broken record, now is the time that all of us in America, whether you're holding office or holding a sign, need to speak up and speak out about these things. And I still believe, even though it seems like the odds are stacked against us, that we can stop some of these cuts, and we need to do everything we can to try.
absolutely agree with Sean Scanlon, our state controller. We've been having a very important discussion. If you haven't heard this live, you can go back and listen to it on WGCH, but also we're on YouTube and Spotify. Um, just a couple more minutes I have with you, Sean. I was reading up on an interesting radio interview you had, and it regarding some, I believe it was tattoos.
Yeah,
Talk to me about that.
Chaz and AJ is one of the more popular radio stations in Connecticut, and every time you go on Chaz and AJ, you literally never know what's going to happen. And I walked in the studio, and they were doing a segment about tattoos that you regret, and I told them a story about how when I was 16, somehow my mother let me go on a road trip with some of my friends to Montreal, and we were all going to
Goodness.
get the same tattoo, but we ended up having a bit of a disagreement and I left before the tattoos, were performed. So to this day, I don't have a tattoo, but I told Chaz and AJ that, the only tattoo I'll ever get is if my two sons, at some point when they're much older,
Uh-huh.
say, "Hey, Dad, let's get matching tattoos." I'll get Scanlon boy tattoos, but other than that, I got no
That's
tattoos.
That's totally adorable. I think that's hilarious. I was like, now what was the final question? Did he actually get the tattoo? Because I don't know. It sounded like a very funny story. Now, one of the other things I just wanted to shout out to your amazing wife, Megan Scanlon. Can you just say a couple things about what she's doing? Because of course now this is also going to
Yeah.
impact the work they're doing.
Yeah,
Uh,
so my wife, Megan Scanlon, is the president CEO of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And she and her organization oversee, the domestic violence providers and sexual assault providers across the state. She and her organization are facing federal cuts because we didn't really talk about this because we talked about Medicaid, but simultaneous to this big Medicaid cut that we're seeing in the state, We've also seen about $400 million of programmatic spending cuts coming from Washington. And her organization and many organizations in the state have been affected by that. Um, and, as you know, Trevor, because I know this is an issue that's deeply personal and important to you, um, she's every day just helping both women and, frankly, some men get out of terribly abusive situations and children get out of these situations. And we have seen a rise in intimate partner violence and, frankly, intimate partner homicides in Connecticut. And all these are preventable. And the money that they got from Washington that they've been cut is intended to go out and help stop these terrible tragedies. We live in Guilford. Just 2 weeks ago, a 12-year-old boy was beaten to death with a baseball bat by his father. And it has completely rocked
Goodness.
me as a dad and our
Yeah,
community. And
Sean.
we have to not accept this. And when I hear them talk in Washington about their cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, cutting programs that help prevent domestic violence is not waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just stupid. And she's doing amazing work. You should check her out if you're interested. Get involved with your local
Yes.
provider.
Hmm.
All of us right now just have to play a role in helping other people. And it's a challenging time, but I'm really proud of the work that she does and the important work that so many people do in our state every day to just try to help each other out.
Yeah. Sean, thank you so much for meeting with us and talking about how you guys are going to handle this. This is going to be a big juggling act. It is unbelievable. I believe it's cruel and wrong. And this is just, I believe who we are as a people, especially here in Connecticut. So to your call to action, right? Call your representatives, call your senators, call, your local elected officials and let them know how you feel. So, Sean, thank you so much. And hopefully Megan will come on the show with me sometime
Yeah.
soon. And good luck with the rest of this, because I know we've got to pass our budget here and the federal budget's coming up. So there's going to be a lot of work for you to do to figure this all out. So thank you for doing the hard work and serving us as the state of Connecticut.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks for what you're doing with the show and trying to raise awareness about these important topics. It's really, really more important than ever that we have these kind of conversations, and I thank you for doing it.
Of course. All right. Take care. Bye, Sean.